Well, thanks for having us out. They wanted the Overwatch team, but we're StarCraft II, so we're going to do our best to keep you guys interested. We're here to talk about a change that we made in StarCraft II just this last November to bring the game from a more traditional box product business model to free-to-play. And since Casual Connect has a lot of mobile and other types of games that are already in this business model, thought it might be a chance to talk about some of the unique challenges that we faced taking something that really wasn't envisioned as a free-to-play game and an audience that isn't necessarily used to free-to-play. Like, there are free-to-play core games out there, but I think StarCraft II in particular, it's really kind of an old school, hardcore audience. And so how we navigated some of that in bringing StarCraft II over to a free-to-play business model. So just quick introductions from our side. Chris, or everybody calls him Crash, so I'm going to refer to him as Crash, is the lead UI designer who was on StarCraft II for the free-to-play transition. And maybe, do you want to say a little bit about what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so I work in UX. So for you that don't know what that is, I work mostly in user experience. So when you push a button, if you don't like a button, if you don't like an interaction, a timing, any of those kinds of things, I work on that side of it. And then I also work on the system side. So if there's a new feature coming out, we want to know how people are going to interact with that, or the tidbits or the gravy of that feature. I'm the one who dives in and starts dealing with that kind of stuff as well.
And I'm on the production side, so I try to help keep things organized and deal with building business cases for things like going free to play. So we'll dive in. I think this first slide, we just wanted to talk about what StarCraft II is for a second in case not everybody knows. But quick show of hands, how many of you already know what StarCraft II is? Yeah?
Okay. Yeah.
Pretty much everybody.
We weren't sure.
But I'm relieved. There were a couple of hands that didn't go up, so it's good that we put this slide in there. Okay, so StarCraft II is a real-time strategy game. It launched in 2010. It had a couple of expansions. And it is really PC-based, so PC Macintosh as a platform. It's pretty complicated to play, keyboard and mouse. These guys who compete for prize money in tournaments playing StarCraft II, they are superhuman, like in their ability to just use keyboard shortcuts, and we measure actions per minute. Like, these guys, they're really superhuman. So it's anything but casual. Definitely not what I would consider a casual game. And it's really known for being competitive. We do have cooperative modes, but it's largely known for being able to compete against other players. And Crash is a way better StarCraft II player than I am. Okay, so this is a little segment from the cinematics from the game, just to give you a taste for those who weren't familiar. All right, anyway, that was not gameplay, but is the storytelling aspect of the game. So why go free-to-play? StarCraft II has been out for 7.5 years. It has enjoyed great success. It is one of, if not the most successful real-time strategy game. Wow, okay, slide formatting.
Yeah, our font got lost.
Oh, okay. Crash says our font got lost. But anyway, I will work through that. So one of the things that we wanted to do at this point in StarCraft II's life cycle is continue to sustain engagement for players. There are around 2 million players who still play StarCraft II every month. And we wanted to add to that pool of players to help just sustain long-term engagement for the game, because we really believe it's a great game. We want to share it with more people. There are territories of the world that are very price sensitive. This is certainly true in China, Eastern Europe, Latin America. So we saw a lot of potential to grow our player base in those regions. We felt like lowering the barrier to entry from a cost perspective would have meaningful impact there. Esports, where we have tournaments for prize pools, are a big part of the StarCraft II culture. We wanted to get more viewership, even if people didn't become hardcore StarCraft II players, just by nature of being able to play the game. If you look at the most popular esports in the world, most of them are free to play. And then the last line is really important. We were not in this for making more money. We are very fortunate to work at a company that has had success with its titles, and not everything we do has to be about money. This was not. I'm going to pass it over to Chris to talk a little bit from here.
All right, so I'm going to dive a little bit into the challenges. So when it was first being talked about, we're going to convert this core game into a free-to-play game, there's a lot of systems that go into StarCraft. There's a lot of modes of play. There's competitive, which we had talked about, but there's also campaign. There's our new mode, which is co-op missions, which allows you to play with someone else. We also have arcade. We have custom games. There's so many different variations and permutations and ways that you can actually play this game that where do you start? What do you convert? What stays not free? So it was quite a challenge. The most important thing for me when I first began was to not upset the people who are currently playing, those who had actually purchased the game, who had actually spent money on the game over the 7 years that this game has been out. How do we not upset them? So that was number one value. Then we also wanted to make sure that since the game was not designed, like I said, for free to play in mind, how do I nitpick which areas to give away for free? And ultimately, what this kind of got ourselves down to and where we wanted to go with it was, in this next thing, was proposed solutions. We ultimately, those slides. Ultimately, what it came down to was, I'm a gamer, I love to game, I love to share the gaming experience with other people who love to game. How can we just give away more of the game? How can we just get you in, let you play a game that maybe you were intimidated by before? I know when I used to talk to people about StarCraft II, I would say, hey, have you ever played StarCraft II? They go, oh, I've tried it, but I'm not good. And then they never play it. So we wanted to erase that barrier, that feeling of like, I'm too nervous. Instead, we wanted to open the doors and tell you that it's okay. It's okay to play this game. It's not as scary as you think. And there's different modes of play that will allow you to play the game that maybe is not as crazy as the PvP portions of it. And then also, we wanted to protect the ladder. So going back to that PvP portion of it, those of you that actually do like to compete and do take it hardcore, having an influx of new players that could come in and maybe be toxic, they could be jerks, they could be trolls. Maybe they're a really, really good player who has started a new account so they can troll all the people who are low and starting. So we have to account for all of that too. So we start putting in barriers, ways to protect those people, to keep them safe and keep them from being harassed and still enjoy the game. And then finally, just maintain the catalog. We want to make sure that each and every one of the things that you can play, like I talked about arcade, co-op, all of those have some kind of a free value that you can actually go into. So, for example, with multiplayer, we open the gates that you can unlock multiplayer. Multiplayer is no longer something you need to purchase. For co-op missions, we have 3 commanders that you can actually play, but we provided the ability to play all of the commanders up to level 5, so you can experience them right out the door, see what they're all about. And then for campaign, we just straight up gave the first campaign away for free. So you get to play that from beginning to end all the way and enjoy and see what that's about. And if it's for you, then you can go further down the campaign trail. And that's really the things that we faced when we were making those decisions. Really and ultimately, our biggest value was bring more people in and show them that it's fun. They don't have to be scared. StarCraft II is not as scary as you think it is.
So I'll say, from my perspective, having joined this team and developed this aspiration to take the game free to play, it wasn't like that suggestion internally was just immediately met with enthusiasm. It's fair to say that on the dev team, there were some divided opinions.
I was one of those divided opinions.
Even this man. And also up the chain within the company, there were some divided opinions on whether this is really something we wanted to do, because the game still sells every month, thousands of copies. Like, people are still actively buying and playing StarCraft II. By going free to play, there is clearly a risk of undermining that ongoing business. There's clearly a risk of negative perception, all these things that Crash just talked about. I think the team was very concerned that our audience would revolt at this kind of change, that it would cheapen the game, because there is some negative perception around free-to-play. There was recently a lot of controversy around loot boxes. We didn't implement loot boxes, but there's definitely some controversy around free-to-play.
Yeah.
So it was a scary moment. And even at the last minute, one of the C-level executives said, do we really want to call it free-to-play? I mean, okay, you guys have made these design changes, but free-to-play, like, do we really want to say that? And so literally down to the 11th hour, there was debate over whether we were actually going to call StarCraft II free-to-play. At the end of the day, obviously, everybody got on board and decided to move forward with it, and we'll talk a little bit now about the results. So the graph is a little dim on the lower left there, but we see with each box release a big surge in the number of players that come in to play the game. And our theory always had been that those were campaign players that play through that story that we showed you segments of, and that once they finished the story, that they churned out of the game and that they stopped playing. We didn't release any new story content with free-to-play, but we saw a similar surge in influx of players who came to play when we went free-to-play. So that was very gratifying to see. We're still on the way back down from that spike, and we expected it to be somewhat of a spike, so we're not surprised to see that. The other thing that did surprise us was that our audience, our core audience, who we were very concerned about, was happy that they could now share this game with their friends and bring more people into the game. And I really think the approach that Crash took, and this guy deserves credit for brainstorming this, where we didn't add new transactions. We literally didn't add any new transactions to the game. We just took stuff before that used to cost money and gave it away for free. And I think that was a big part of the positive sentiment, because they couldn't accuse us of nickel and diming them. We didn't change anything. We just gave more stuff away. I don't know if you want to talk about some of the other...
I would say in that, the best part for me now is that I'm actually playing the game with family members across the world that I didn't think would ever even consider StarCraft. My 8-year-old plays StarCraft now. So there's all the, it's opened the doors into a world that I didn't expect, because the game in my mind was always so hardcore. It's a hardcore game, and it's meant to play with hardcore people. And him driving this and pushing this idea changed it. Now there's a lot of people playing, and it's really cool. It's really exciting to see a lot more people stepping in and playing a game that there's a huge community that's really passionate about, that can share it with others that were maybe intimidated, which is really awesome.
Yeah, and we're about to have this moment at the beginning of February, and maybe some of you have heard about this, where StarCraft II is going to be the first esport that is included in the Olympics. And we are not a medaled event. We're just part of the lead-in to the Olympics in Pyeongchang, Korea. But I'm going to be headed over at the beginning of February to be there for the tournament that we have with players from all around the world who have qualified to compete in Pyeongchang. And that really is a step towards legitimizing games of all kinds in the world of competition. And so we hope someday that we will become a medaled event, but super excited that that's happening. And I think the fact that we are now free to play levels the ability for people around the world who do want to compete to just download the game, learn it, and aspire to that level of competition. So super excited about that. So I think we feel like it was a success. We didn't erode the business. Our user base was happy. We succeeded in getting more players into the game. So I think there's a happy video at the end. This is our BlizzCon 2016 World Champion Beyond.
So it was basically trying to please these people that were avid, really happy players. We wanted to keep them doing this. We didn't want them to be upset with us in any way. So we felt like we won. It was great. And those of you who know Beyond, that was an amazing game if you got to see it. It was so good.
Right here at the Anaheim.
Right here in Anaheim. That was one of my favorite games, watching that series.
Agreed. So that's what we had to say. I think hopefully we have a few minutes left to open it up to questions. And,
great. Fantastic. Questions, everybody? Has behavior changed in the game in terms of, engagement overall? I saw a spike, but are people playing longer now? Or are you doing any of the things that a lot of people do to optimize users?
We do look closely at the data, and obviously the players who came in had some different characteristics from the core engaged base that we had before. As I'm sure is the case for all of you, we are always trying to optimize and reduce churn and increase RPPU and all that good stuff that you're used to in the free-to-play world, but that's an evolving process for sure.
And I think, like sentiment-wise, the cool thing that we're seeing with the players is all the people he were talking about that were like existing veteran players, they've actually taken on the role of helping and usher in the new players, which is something that's really cool to see the community. It actually behooves me to watch them do this. Right. It's really cool. But they're ushering in the new players. They're helping teach them. They're not being trolls and jerks. So it's pretty fantastic.
Is your features or systems or content design philosophy going to change at all now that you've broadened your player base to include more like not hardcore people? Or are you going to stick with like stuff that's designed for the traditional hardcore audience?
Crash can talk a little bit about some of the things we did in terms of onboarding, but I think because we're such a mature life cycle game, meaning deep into the life cycle of the product, we didn't set out to reinvent StarCraft, and I think there's a lot of good thinking about how the genre might evolve in the future, both inside and outside Blizzard, but we did take some steps to try to make new players coming in comfortable. Do you want to talk about that?
What I did for that was, currently in the game, we have a lot of systems that were created to kind of teach you the different modes, but you had to previously be invested in those modes. You'd have to go into campaign to learn how to play campaign. And so, or multiplayer or something along that line. So instead, what we wanted to do was, as soon as you came in, I wanted to surface the different types of games, because unlike many games, unlike some of the games at Blizzard itself, StarCraft is actually 7 games like mixed into one giant game, and you don't know what to play. So when you come in, I wanted to offer you some kind of a way to show you what it is, and then give you a chance to try it. So you could try that mode and see if it's for you. New players will typically try to steer you towards either the campaign or towards co-op missions. Those are non-competitive. They're a little bit lighter weight. You'll learn the game itself. But we don't sway you away from playing competitive if that's what you want to do. So we just kind of wanted to introduce you to it all and then let you pick, basically.
Cool.
Kind of in keeping with that, as far as going free to play, has it been any kind of deterrent or had any kind of impact on continued development? Not just for this title, maybe for other titles. I know at Blizzard you guys have dedicated teams for different titles, but if someone had mentioned like, oh, StarCraft 3 years ago, and maybe that was a concept, is it now focused on continuing development for StarCraft 2 now that it's free to play, as opposed to sequels?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that facilitated this transition to free-to-play was that the team had already made the transition to treating StarCraft II as software as a service. So we had already moved into the mode of having some release, whether it's a feature or micro-content, every month. And so we're continuing that. I think if we hadn't done that, we probably would have needed to adopt that mindset. But since that was already in place, we're just continuing that strategy.
So I'm curious, you guys did a somewhat similar thing with like the onboarding and some free-to-play stuff with World of Warcraft. And then obviously StarCraft II here just going completely free-to-play. Do you see this as kind of a use case that you'll potentially bring to other games that are later in their life cycle, like Diablo 3, for example?
Since we're just on the StarCraft team, we actually don't know what the other teams are thinking around that.
Yeah.
I can say that Diablo 3 in China has a more free-to-play approach than it does in the West, so I think there's some precedent for that, but what the other teams decide to do ultimately will be up to them.
I'm going to kind of ask the same question in the opposite way, which is there any learnings from the other game teams of what they're doing with their games that you think would be interesting for StarCraft in the future?
So much, yeah. Do you want to start that one?
Sure. So from a design perspective, we have a council that's at Blizzard, and we meet a lot and we talk with each other's games. We share ideas. So in working on the free-to-play model for StarCraft, I met with various design leaders from various teams to talk about what my ideas were, the ramifications. So we do a lot of discussion with each other, and we take a lot of learnings from each other. So that we definitely do a lot of, actually, at least from a design perspective.
Yeah, and likewise on the business perspective. One of the wonderful things about how Blizzard is set up, just having 6 major game teams all on the same campus, there is a lot of opportunity for cross-pollination.
So with all of the new added players, like, did you guys find that you had to change like the philosophy behind how you balanced like ranked matches? Because I imagine that like having a new set of users that respond to the game in a very different way would affect just like how you overall do things from month to month. Like, were there any big changes, any big learnings?
I was going to say we definitely take those learnings. I don't know that there was any major changes yet. He might be able to speak onto that as well. But we have a balanced team that's constantly monitoring those type of things. Those players come in and then they make changes pretty regularly as needed based off of those things. He might have actually more information on that.
So the truth is the new players who come into the game are still learning the beginning mechanics. And so the fine detail of unit balance, race balance, doesn't pertain as much to them. If you are bronze just entering in, you're still learning how to macro, how to build enough workers, when to expand, the basic meta of the game. So balance change doesn't actually have that much impact unless it's a massive change on those new players coming in. It's much more the higher levels of the ladder and obviously the professional community.
Great, thank you. Give it up for Tim and Crash, everyone. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.